In 1821, a small town recorded something it never meant to remember. A boy began speaking a language no one had ever heard, yet everyone who listened felt something inside them recognize it. The words were not learned. They were not taught. They were not meant for human mouths. Men who heard him grew ill. Women covered their ears and wept. Children understood him without knowing why, and the ground beneath the town began to change. This is not a story about possession. This is not a story about madness. This is the true account of a voice that did not come from above, but from beneath. And once you hear what the boy said, you may realize the language never stopped being spoken. No one noticed the boy at first. That was the first mistake. In the spring of 1821, the settlement of Alder's Run sat quietly along a bend of forest and marshland where maps grew uncertain and roads learned to forget themselves. The town was small enough that strangers were remembered, and large enough that silences could hide inside it. People there spoke English, mostly, with accents bent by distance and isolation. Some still carried old words from Ireland, Scotland, Germany, but nothing that didn't belong to this century, this soil, this breath. The boy spoke none of it. They found him at dawn, sitting at the edge of the mill pond, barefoot, knees drawn to his chest, whispering into the water as if it were listening back. His clothes were wrong, too old and cut, too careful in stitching. Linen, not cotton. Buttons carved from bone. The kind of garments no one made anymore, except in stories meant to scare children into obedience. When Mr. Hawthorne, the miller, approached him, the boy looked up and spoke. The sound stopped Hawthorne where he stood. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language Hawthorne had heard in 40 years of listening to men curse, pray, and die. The words rolled low and rhythmic, layered with consonants that pressed together like stones under pressure. Some syllables dragged, others snapped shut sharply, as if the boy were closing doors with his tongue. Hawthorne felt a headache bloom behind his eyes. "What did you say, lad?" he asked. The boy repeated it. This time, the water rippled, not outward from the boy, but inward, as if something below the surface had leaned closer. The boy's eyes were gray, not the soft gray of children, but the flat gray of weathered iron. He studied Hawthorne with the quiet curiosity of something that had never been young. By the time others arrived, the boy had gone silent. They brought him into town. He did not resist. He did not cry. He did not ask for food or water. He simply watched, faces, hands, mouths, as if cataloging how things had changed since he last needed to know. When spoken to, he answered only in that language. It made people uncomfortable in a way they couldn't explain. The schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Briggs, tried to write the sounds down. She failed. The letters didn't fit. The more she listened, the more she realized the boy wasn't using sounds so much as patterns, repetitions that folded in on themselves, phrases that seemed to reference something already said but long forgotten. "It feels older than words," she whispered later. Like instructions, the preacher, Reverend Cole, was less patient. He listened once, just once, before his face drained of color. "That tongue is not of God," he said. "It is not meant for air." They asked the boy his name. He placed his hand flat on the table, fingers spread carefully, as if feeling for vibrations beneath the wood. "I am called when the ground opens," he said, in perfect English. The room went still. It was the first time he had spoken the language of the town. Then, he returned to the other one. That night, 3 people dreamed the same dream. They stood in a stone corridor with no light source, yet everything was visible. Symbols were carved into the walls, not letters, but marks that suggested function rather than meaning. Doors lined the corridor, each one sealed with iron fastenings grown red with age. At the far end stood a child, not the boy, something smaller. Something folded. It spoke, and the dreamers woke with blood in their mouths, tongues bitten clean through skin. By morning, animals refused to enter Alder's Run. Horses stopped at the road and screamed. Dogs dug frantically at the earth, whining, then fled. Birds avoided the trees near the mill pond entirely. The boy sat on the steps of the meeting hall, humming softly. Miss Briggs approached him again, her voice shaking. "Where did you learn that language?" she asked. The boy looked up at her. "I didn't learn it," he said. "I was born after it stopped being spoken." She swallowed hard. "That doesn't make sense," he smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. "It wasn't meant to," he replied. "It was meant to seal." That afternoon, the first crack appeared in the ground. Not a collapse, not an accident. A line, precise and clean, running from the edge of the mill pond toward the town, as if drawn by a careful hand beneath the soil. The boy stood beside it, whispering again. And something deep below Alder's Run began to answer, slowly, patiently, recognizing a voice it had not heard spoken aloud since it was buried alive. The crack in the ground did not widen. It listened. By the second night, the line of broken earth had stretched past the meeting hall, threading through Alder's Run like a careful incision. No dirt spilled up, no stones shifted. It was as if the soil had been parted and instructed to remember its place. The boy sat beside it, murmuring in the old language, his voice low and even. Each phrase carried a weight that pressed against the chest of anyone who stood too close, like pressure changes before a storm. Reverend Cole ordered the boy locked inside the meeting hall. They used iron chains, not because the boy fought, but because the language made men afraid of anything less. As the chains closed around his wrists, the boy flinched for the first time. Not in pain, in recognition. "That metal remembers too much," he said in English softly. It was folded to close a mouth. The chains went slack. Not broken, not cut, simply opened. The men stepped back, crossing themselves. That night, the bells rang. No one pulled the rope. They rang once, then stopped. Then once more, slower. Each toll echoed too long, stretching into something that felt less like sound and more like measurement. Miss Briggs stood at her window, writing the boy's words over and over again, trying to catch a pattern that made sense. As she traced one phrase, her hand froze. She realized the marks weren't repeating. They were descending, each phrase shorter than the last. Each word losing something, shedding syllables like skin, as if the language itself were counting down to a simpler, older state. Outside, the crack glowed faintly. No light source, just a suggestion of depth becoming visible. The boy stood alone in the street, speaking clearly now. People gathered at windows. No one dared step outside. He spoke of doors, of seals, of an agreement made when the forest was younger and the ground still remembered how to close. He spoke of a sound that could not be allowed to finish forming. And then he stopped. Silence fell hard enough to hurt. From beneath the town came a reply. Not a voice, a shape. The earth along the crack bowed inward, as if something beneath had shifted its weight. The mill pond churned without wind. The water darkened, thickening, pulling at the edges as if trying to drain downward. Mr. Hawthorne ran toward the boy, shouting for him to stop. The boy turned. "You shouldn't be this close when it breathes," he said calmly. The ground opened beneath Hawthorne's feet. Not wide, not violent, just enough. He fell without a sound. The earth sealed itself immediately after, smooth and unbroken. By morning, there was no sign he had ever existed. The town gathered in the meeting hall at dawn, faces pale, hands trembling. Reverend Cole stood at the pulpit, Bible open to a page that would not stay flat. "This is blasphemy," he declared. "A trick of the devil meant to test us." The boy sat in the front row. "It's older than that," he said gently. "Older than your names for fear." Cole's voice cracked. "Then name it." The boy looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes slowly, deliberately. "If I name it," he said, "you'll hear it back." No one spoke. Miss Briggs broke the silence. "What happens when you finish speaking?" she asked. The boy considered the question. "Either the seal holds," he said, "or it remembers why it was made." Outside, the crack began to widen at last, not tearing, but unfolding, revealing stone beneath the soil, etched with markings that matched the boy's language perfectly. Older than the town. Older than the forest. Older than the idea that some things should stay buried. The boy stood and placed his bare foot on the stone. Far below, something shifted, vast, patient, and newly aware. And Alder's Run finally understood. The language wasn't calling something up. It was keeping something down. The stone beneath the soil was warm. Not sun-warmed. Not alive warm. It was the warmth of something that had been kept closed for a very long time and was only now being allowed to feel the air again. The boy stood barefoot on it, eyes half-lidded, speaking softly. Not chanting, not praying, but maintaining. The language flowed from him in controlled intervals, like breaths taken on purpose. Each phrase pressed downward, firm and precise. Miss Briggs was the first to understand what terrified her most. The boy was tired, not physically. Structurally, his sentences were shorter now. His pauses longer. The sounds of the language were losing ornament, becoming blunt, functional, like tools stripped down to their final use. "What happens if you stop?" she asked, her voice barely steady. The boy didn't look at her. "Then it finishes forming," he said. "And once it finishes, it doesn't need me anymore." The crack widened again, not outward, downward. A vertical opening revealed stone steps spiraling into darkness, each one carved with the same markings. The boy spoke aloud. The symbols were not decorative. They were instructions, warnings folded into geometry. Reverend Cole fell to his knees. "We didn't build this," he whispered. "No?" the boy replied. "You were built on it." From below came a sound that made teeth ache. Not a roar, not a voice. A pressure fluctuation. As if something vast had shifted its attention upward. The language stuttered for the first time. The boy staggered, catching himself on the edge of the stone. Blood trickled from his nose, dark and slow. Miss Briggs rushed forward instinctively. He raised a hand. "Don't touch me," he said sharply, in English. "It's learning my shape." The air above the opening began to distort. bending slightly, as if the space itself were being tested for flexibility. Shadows stretched where no body stood. The steps below seemed longer when looked at directly, shorter when seen from the corner of the eye. From deep within, a sound tried to become a word. The boy responded immediately, snapping back into the old language with force, his voice sharper now, commanding. The sound recoiled. The stone pulsed. Several townspeople screamed as memories not their own flooded their minds. Visions of forests flattened, of hands carving symbols into stone under a sky that had no stars yet, of something arriving wrong and needing to be buried before it finished understanding where it was. Miss Briggs dropped to her knees, retching. "It doesn't belong here," she gasped. "No," the boy said. "This place belongs to it." Reverend Cole crawled backward, eyes wild. "Then why are you here?" The boy finally turned to him. "Because languages rot," he said, "and seals fail when no one remembers how to speak them." A deep vibration rolled through the ground. The steps below shifted, just slightly, aligning themselves toward the surface. The thing beneath was no longer just listening. It was preparing. The boy's voice wavered. Miss Briggs saw it then, fine cracks forming along the stone where his feet stood, radiating outward like stress fractures. "You can't keep this up," she said. "I don't have to forever," he replied. "Just long enough for you to choose." "Choose what?" He looked at the town. At the church. At the homes. At the people who had lived unknowingly atop a mouth. "Whether it remembers you kindly," he said, "or as weight." The ground shook again. A syllable formed below, almost complete. The boy screamed, not in pain, but in urgency, forcing a final phrase into the language, one that echoed downward like a slammed door. The steps cracked. Stone dust filled the air. The opening narrowed, but did not close. The boy collapsed to his knees, gasping. "It knows the end is close," he whispered. "And it's learning faster now." Miss Briggs looked down into the dark. Something shifted just beyond sight. Something that had almost remembered how to speak back. Silence followed the collapse, but it was the wrong kind. Not relief. Not safety. It was the silence that comes after something changes its mind. The boy remained on his knees at the edge of the broken stone, shoulders rising and falling too fast, as if his lungs were struggling to remember their original purpose. His mouth moved once, soundless, shaping a syllable he did not release. Miss Briggs noticed his fingers first. They were trembling, not from fear, but from resistance. The symbols carved into the stone beneath him were fading, not erasing, withdrawing, like ink being pulled back into the rock. Whatever was sealed below no longer needed those instructions as much as it had before. Reverend Cole forced himself to stand. "We should leave," he said, voice cracking. "This isn't meant for us." The boy laughed weakly. "It already is." A new sound rose from the depths. This one had rhythm, a pattern that repeated every few seconds, like a slow, deliberate knock, except it didn't strike stone. It struck space. Each pulse caused the air to compress slightly, making ears pop and vision blur. Miss Briggs covered her mouth. "It's mapping," she whispered. The boy nodded. "It's learning where up is." A sudden memory slammed into Miss Briggs' mind, standing in the schoolhouse years ago, watching the boy draw symbols on the slate before she'd taught him letters. She remembered scolding him, wiping the slate clean. The symbols had looked like mistakes. They were anchors. The ground lurched. Several townspeople fell as the earth shifted, not violently but deliberately, aligning itself. The spiral staircase below rearranged again, steps sliding against each other with the sound of stone grinding bone. From the darkness came something worse than a voice. A question, not spoken aloud, but felt. A pressure behind the eyes, inside the skull. "Why am I still closed?" The boy screamed as the question hit him hardest. Blood ran freely now, soaking into his shirt. "Stop answering it!" Miss Briggs cried. "I'm not," he gasped. "It's reading the gaps." The air near the opening warped further, light bending into subtle curves. Shadows pooled unnaturally, sticking to corners and edges as if gravity had shifted sideways. A hand emerged. Not a hand as humans understand it, but a structure attempting the idea. Segmented, half-formed, pressing against the edge of the opening from below. It did not climb. It tested. The stone hissed where it touched, symbols flaring briefly before dimming again. Reverend Cole began to pray aloud. The boy snapped his head up. "Stop!" he shouted. "It recognizes repetition. You're giving it rhythm." The prayer died in Cole's throat. The thing below adjusted. The boy struggled to his feet, swaying. When he spoke again, the language was different, harsher, faster, layered with sounds Miss Briggs had never heard before. This wasn't maintenance. This was revision. The stone steps shuddered violently. Cracks raced up the spiral like veins. Miss Briggs understood then. The boy wasn't sealing it anymore. He was changing the rules. "You'll tear yourself apart," she said. He looked at her, eyes glassy but focused. "It already knows how to open," he said. I'm teaching it how to stay wrong." A sound like a scream echoed from below, distorted, furious, unfinished. The hand recoiled. The opening narrowed further, stone grinding shut in jagged increments. But the ground did not calm. It resisted. The entire hill shuddered as if something beneath it had shifted its weight, preparing not to rise but to push sideways. Miss Briggs realized the truth too late. If it couldn't come up, it would come out. Somewhere else. The boy collapsed again, his voice breaking mid-phrase. The language fractured. The symbols flared, then went dark. From far below, something laughed. Not with sound, with certainty. The hill did not explode. That would have been mercy. Instead, it exhaled. A long, slow release felt through the soles of boots, through bone, through memory. The ground softened, not like mud, but like something briefly forgetting it was stone. The opening sealed completely. No crack, no seam. As if it had never existed, the townspeople stood frozen, waiting for the aftershock that never came. Birds did not return. Wind did not move. Even breath felt loud. The boy lay motionless on the grass. Miss Briggs dropped beside him, pressing her fingers to his neck. A pulse. Thin, uneven, but present. "Get him inside," she said, though she wasn't sure where inside was anymore. They carried him back to the schoolhouse at the edge of town. The same one where he had first scratched symbols into slate. The same walls that had absorbed his voice day after day. Night arrived too quickly. Clouds slid across the moon like deliberate cover. The boy woke screaming. Not words. Coordinates. His mouth spat sharp, clipped sounds, numbers layered with tones, directions twisted into syllables. Every phrase ended with the same guttural stop, like a door slamming. Miss Briggs held his shoulders. "You're safe," she said, though the word felt false the moment she spoke it. His eyes snapped open. They reflected nothing. "It moved," he whispered. Her blood ran cold. "Where?" He swallowed hard. "Sideways," he said. "It doesn't need the hill anymore." Something thudded against the schoolhouse wall. Once. Then again. Not impact. Pressure. As if something large were leaning gently against the building, testing its patience. The windows fogged from the outside in. Reverend Cole backed away, clutching his Bible so tightly the leather creaked. "We sealed it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The boy shook his head. "I bent it," he corrected. "There's a difference." The pressure increased. Wood groaned. Nails squealed. The fog on the windows began to form shapes, not faces, paths, lines intersecting, branching, correcting themselves. The boy began whispering again. Miss Briggs listened and understood nothing. Her knees weakened, her teeth ached, her thoughts felt slightly misaligned, as if she'd woken up in a version of herself a half-inch off. Each step landed without sound, yet the ground responded. Floorboards lifting, settling, as if reality itself were adjusting around invisible weight. A scream erupted from the far end of town. Then none. He sat upright, staring at the door. "It found an easier language," he said softly. The door handle turned, not down, inward, like it was being pulled through the door rather than opening it. Miss Briggs understood in that moment what the boy had done. He hadn't trapped it. He had taught it how to pass unnoticed. The handle snapped back into place. Footsteps moved away. The pressure vanished. Dawn came pale and sickly. The town was still standing. But people were wrong. Some stared too long at nothing. Some spoke sentences that curved back on themselves. One woman tried to give birth to a sound instead of a child. The boy watched it all from the schoolhouse steps. "They'll stabilize," he said, though there was no comfort in his tone. "Most of them." Miss Briggs asked the question she had avoided since the hill closed. "And you?" He looked at his hands. The skin around his fingers was cracking, not bleeding, but separating, like poorly dried clay. "I'm the reference point," he said. "It learned through me." From somewhere beneath the town, far deeper than the hill, something adjusted its position. Not trapped, not free. Embedded. The boy stood. "I can't stay," he said. "As long as I'm here, it knows where here is." Miss Briggs reached for him. He stepped back. "If it ever starts teaching someone else," he said quietly, "don't listen for the words." He walked into the trees. The forest bent around him, not visually, but conceptually, as if forgetting how many trees it contained. By nightfall, no one could remember his face, only the sounds. And sometimes, when the ground settles the wrong way, the language starts again. The language did not disappear. It thinned, like smoke after a fire, no longer choking but never gone. Years passed. Then decades. The town renamed itself. Roads were rerouted. The hill was marked on maps as unstable ground, fenced off, forgotten by design. But forgetting does not erase what has learned you. Children born afterward sometimes cried in patterns that made adults uneasy. Not loud, precise, a rhythm too deliberate for chance. Midwives learned not to write those cries down. At night, the ground beneath certain houses adjusted itself. Floors slanted by a finger's width, nails loosened, doors opened inward without being touched. People blamed settling. They always do. Miss Briggs grew old. She stopped teaching. Her hands shook when she tried to write, as if her muscles remembered symbols her mind refused to hold. She kept one slate locked away, blank. Yet every morning, fine white dust gathered on it, shaped like erased chalk. One winter, a survey crew arrived from the city. They brought instruments, new ones, devices that listened to the earth instead of striking it. On the second night, every needle spun at once. On the third, one man began sleep-talking in clipped tonal syllables that made the others nauseous to hear. They packed up before dawn, left their equipment behind. No one retrieved it. In the spring, a woman gave birth on the edge of town. The child did not cry. He watched, eyes tracking corners that didn't exist. When he finally spoke, months later, his first sound was not a word. It was correction. Something in the room shifted. Not furniture. Distance. The midwife dropped the child and ran. By the time anyone returned, the house was empty. No struggle. No tracks. Just a faint indentation in the floor, like something had briefly pressed upward from below. That was when Miss Briggs understood. The boy had not been the end. He had been the hinge. The thing beneath the hill did not want bodies. It wanted alignment. It learned language because language reshapes reality. It learned children because children learn without resistance. It learned patience because time bends easier than space. And now, it no longer needed to be taught. The slate shattered one night without being touched. Miss Briggs died in her sleep. Her last written words were found carved into the wooden floor beneath her bed, letters burned inward, not scratched. Not English, not any language ever cataloged, but every symbol pointed the same way, down. Today, the town still exists. People move there because it feels quiet, because the land feels stable, because nothing bad has happened there in a very long time. Sometimes, tourists take photos, old houses, old faces, old hands folded politely in portraits. If you ever find one of those photos, look closely. Not at the eyes, at the fingers. If they are positioned too carefully, if the knuckles form angles that feel intentional, if the shadows between them resemble lines instead of darkness. Do not copy them. Do not trace them. And above all, do not try to pronounce what they are spelling, because the ground remembers. And once you say it correctly, it will know exactly where you are. The town still stands. Its roads are quiet. Its soil is calm. Its history neatly summarized in books that leave things out. But language never truly dies. It waits in gestures, in sounds children make before they know words, in symbols people draw without knowing why. And sometimes, in old recordings, old stories, old videos like this one, it listens back. If this story unsettled you, do not dismiss that feeling. Some things recognize attention. This channel exists to remember what history tried to bury. What was erased? What was silenced? You've been watching Forgotten Remains. And now that you know this story, listen carefully tonight. If you hear something whispering in a pattern, do not answer it, because some languages are not meant to be spoken again.